I woke up before the sun, tied on my old apron, and baked his favorite pie. The one I learned from my own mother. Crust chilled just right, cinnamon folded in by hand. I wrapped it carefully, packed it like it was gold, and drove 3 hours without stopping, through traffic and wind, past all the trees already bare for the season. I told myself it would be worth it. I told myself family doesn't need an invitation. I walked up the steps, pie still warm in my arms, and knocked. When the door opened, it wasn't my son, it was her. She looked at me like I was a question she hadn't studied for. Then she said it, quiet, almost casual. "Oh, we didn't count you." She didn't move, didn't take the pie. I felt the weight of all my years pressed down in that moment. So I turned, got back in my car, and drove home with nothing but silence in the seat beside me. 3 days later, they found something in the mailbox, and this time, I was the one who left no words unspoken. Thank you for staying with me. If you're watching this, tell me where you're tuning in from. It helps, more than you know, to feel a little less alone. Thanksgiving, to me, was never about the menu. It was about the noise, the smell of onions and butter, the way we had to squeeze extra chairs around the table. I cooked for 20 without blinking. My son used to mash potatoes beside me, standing on a stool, tongue poking out in focus. He'd say, "We're a team, right?" And I'd nod without needing to speak. I never imagined a time I wouldn't be part of it. I didn't need a formal invite. I was the one who built those traditions. I taught him the meaning of gathering. So when she said they hadn't counted me, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a message, and it reached me, loud and clear. That morning, I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every part of it. I tied on the apron my mother left me, the one with the little frayed edge near the pocket where she used to tuck her spoon. I hadn't worn it in a while, but it still smelled faintly of vanilla and flour, like her kitchen on a cold morning. I laid everything out on the counter just like she taught me, not rushing, not guessing. Cold butter, sifted flour, a pinch of salt between my fingers. No shortcuts. That crust recipe has been in our family longer than I've had silver in my hair. I could make it with my eyes closed, but I never did. Some things deserve your full attention. I picked the apples myself from the small tree in my backyard, the one I planted when he left for college. It's not a big tree, and it doesn't give much fruit, but that pie came from it. Every slice, every sweet piece. I wrapped it carefully in a towel, not the plastic wrap they use now, but cloth, like something meant to be carried with care. I placed it in the passenger seat beside me, like a quiet companion on the road. I even buckled it in. It may sound silly, but to me it wasn't just dessert. It was history. It was love. It was every memory I could fit into a dish. I wore a blouse with small buttons I always saved for the holidays and pinned on the brooch I wore to his first Thanksgiving. A small gold leaf. Nothing flashy, but it meant something. It was the same one I wore the day he brought home his first macaroni turkey from school. I remember how proud he was, handing it to me with glue still drying at the edges. I kept that little craft tucked in my recipe book for years. So, when I drove those 3 hours, I didn't just bring a pie. I brought time. I brought tradition. I brought a piece of mice wrapped in cinnamon and care. And that's what they didn't count. Not just me, but everything that came with me. Everything I thought still mattered. I left the house just after dawn, the sky still gray and soft like a worn blanket. The pie was settled beside me on the seat, snug under the towel, and I kept glancing at it like it might slide away with every turn. The roads were long, familiar in some ways, but stretched thinner with the years. I picked old barns I used to point out to him when he was a boy, back when he still asked questions from the back seat. 3 hours. That's how long it took. 3 hours of winding roads, brake lights blinking in morning traffic, and old country psalms playing on low just to fill the quiet. I didn't mind the drive. I told myself the wait would make the smile at the end even warmer. I imagined it over and over. The door opening, his eyes lighting up, that surprised laugh he used to have when something caught him off guard in the best way. I pictured her calling out from the kitchen, saying my name with cheer, maybe wiping her hands on a dish towel as she walked toward me. Maybe they'd already set a plate, just in case. Maybe they hadn't forgotten, just got busy. I gave them every excuse in my head, turned down every doubt like a voice on a bad station. The trees had lost most of their color, but the wind still carried the scent of leaves, that soft, earthy smell that makes you think of firewood and soup. I passed signs for pumpkin farms and diners with holiday hours, and for a while, I felt like I was moving through a memory, one I hadn't finished living yet. I practiced what I'd say when they opened the door. Nothing dramatic. Just simple. Just me. Thought I'd surprise you. Or maybe brought the pie. Couldn't stay away. I even laughed to myself once, imagining how they'd all shuffle around to make room. The way we used to pull out the little card table when more people showed up than expected. That was always the good kind of problem. Too many loved ones under one roof. I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like someone coming home. And as I turned onto their street, my hands tightened just a little on the wheel, not from fear, but from the hope that had been building in my chest since the moment I tied that apron. I parked outside and looked at the house, their windows glowing like a picture on a postcard, warm and golden. I sat for a second, catching my breath, pressing down that lump in my throat that always comes right before joy. I thought, any moment now, this will all be worth it. I believed it. I truly did. I sat in the car for just a moment longer, looking at the house I'd helped them buy, remembering the day they moved in, how I brought over fresh towels and a crock pot full of stew, how she thanked me with a half smile and he hugged me like he still needed his mother. I stepped out carefully, the pie balanced in my hands. Still warm, still perfect. The wind picked up a little as I walked toward the door, not cold, but sharp enough to make me pull my coat a little tighter. Their porch was swept clean, a wreath on the door, little pumpkins lined up along the steps like a greeting. I thought, maybe they really had just forgotten to call. Maybe this was going to be a beautiful surprise after all. I knocked twice, gently, like I didn't want to interrupt too much, even though my heart was already in my throat. I heard footsteps, hers, not his, and the door opened before I could draw another breath. She stood there, one hand on the frame, eyes meeting mine with that same half smile that never quite reached her cheeks. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't say my name. No, there was no warmth, no surprise, no reaching for a hug or stepping aside to let me in. Just a blink and a sentence that shifted something deep inside me. Oh, we didn't count you. That's all. No follow-up. No, come in anyway. No glance over her shoulder to call for him. Just those 6 words, dropped like loose change on a table, without weight, without care. I stood there, hands still wrapped around the pie like it might break if I let go, but it wasn't the pie that was fragile. It was me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't offer to take it from my arms. She didn't even step back to hold the door open. I realized in that exact moment, I wasn't a part of whatever was happening in that house. Not today. Maybe not ever again. I looked past her for a second, into the warmth of their home. A table already set, glasses catching the light, laughter faint in the background. There were voices. More chairs than I expected. But not one of them had been meant for me. I was looking in from the outside and no one was coming to change that. So I nodded, just once. My mouth didn't work, so I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice not to crack wide open. I turned, slowly, carefully, like I might shatter if I moved too fast. The pie was still warm in my hands as I walked back down those steps. Still whole. Still perfect. Just like the piece of my heart I left behind on that doorstep, unacknowledged, untouched, and unwelcome. I didn't cry in their driveway. I didn't cry when I walked back to the car, or when I buckled the pie in like I had on the way there, hands steady, even though my heart wasn't. I pulled away slow, not wanting to spin gravel or look rushed, like somehow if I moved too fast, it would feel real, like I'd admit something had ended. I drove down that same quiet street, lined with trimmed lawns and leaves gathering in corners, but everything looked different now. The warmth I felt on the way there had gone cold, and the sky had turned that dull gray that makes you feel like you're driving through fog, even when the air's still clear. I passed the same barns, the same signs, the same little white church with its empty lot and tilted cross. But this time, I wasn't thinking about Thanksgiving. I wasn't thinking about laughter or surprises or that soft image I'd painted in my head. I was thinking about how fast love can be forgotten. About how someone can build a home with your help, sleep under a roof you helped pay for, and still shut the door in your face like you're a stranger with a flyer in your hand. The country radio was still playing, but I didn't hear the words. I let the sound fill the car like static, something to stop the silence from swallowing me whole. I passed 2 gas stations, stopped at the second one because my hands were shaking and I needed a minute. I sat there in the parking lot, engine off, pie still sitting upright beside me. I looked at it for a long time, not a single crack in the crust. Still perfect. I thought about leaving it there on the bench outside, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was grief that hadn't found a voice yet. I drove the rest of the way home, with both windows cracked, just enough to let the cold air sting my skin and keep me from falling too deep into thought. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky was dark. My porch light was the only one on in the whole street, glowing soft like it always did, waiting for someone. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, not bothering to turn on the lamp by the window. I carried the pie into the kitchen, set it down on the table, the same table where he used to color placemats with crayons and tell me I was the best cook in the world. I looked at that pie like it was something foreign, like I hadn't poured hours of memory into it. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't touch it. I sat at the table for a while, not eating, not drinking, just listening to the sound of the house breathing around me. A creak in the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the whisper of something that used to be family curling up and slipping out through the cracks. I didn't cry until later. Not then. That night, I didn't even go to bed. I just stayed in that chair, watching the shadows stretch long across the linoleum, thinking to myself how strange it is. How a heart can feel heavier than anything you've ever held, and yet somehow still manage to keep beating. I sat there in the dark kitchen, pie untouched, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for something that I already knew wouldn't come. I stared at the chair across from me, the one he used to climb into without asking, where he'd spin around until I told him to stop before he tipped it over. I could still see his little legs dangling, socked feet knocking against the rungs as he watched me cook, asking 100 questions about why the dough had to rest, why the apples had to be peeled, why love always seemed to smell like cinnamon. He used to tell me I made the best crust, not just in the family, in the whole world. He said it like a fact, like something he'd stand by in court, hands on hips and chin up. I believed him. On Thanksgiving mornings, we had a ritual. I'd make the stuffing while he watched the Macy's parade from the rug, wrapped in a throw blanket too big for his little shoulders. Then he'd get up and come sit on my lap just before Santa came on the screen, and he'd whisper what he wanted for Christmas, like I had a direct line to the North Pole. I didn't need the TV. I just needed the way he leaned back into me, the warmth of his weight, the trust in it. That was the part I never wanted to lose. He was the kind of boy who used to hold my hand in public, long after the age when most stopped. He'd reach for me in parking lots, at fairs, in grocery aisles, like I was his anchor in a world too big. I remember the way his fingers curled around mine, not tight, just sure. And now, they didn't count me. Not even a call, not even a message. Just silence, until the moment I stood there with that pie and heard 6 words that split something open in me I didn't even know was still tender. I tried to remember if I'd done something. Had I said too much? Not enough? Had I crossed some invisible line between mother and mother-in-law without realizing it? My mind went over every visit, every conversation, like I was looking for proof that I had somehow earned this distance. But all I could find were memories, small ones, ordinary ones, the kind you never expect to carry so much weight until they hurt. I remembered how I used to tuck little notes in his lunchbox, jokes, reminders, sometimes just a heart. He used to leave them folded on his dresser like treasures. I remembered his high school graduation, how he scanned the crowd until he saw me, then mouthed, "I did it," like I'd been the one holding up the sky behind him the whole time. And maybe I had. Maybe I did. And still, they didn't count me. I kept wondering how something so warm could grow so cold without a single storm. No fight, no falling out, just space. Just forgetfulness dressed up like new traditions, new families, new priorities that somehow didn't have room for the woman who once stood in the kitchen and baked everything from scratch because she believed love was best served hot and homemade. It's strange how memory works. It doesn't ask permission. It comes uninvited, sits down beside you, and holds up old photos in your mind when you're not ready. And that night, in the quiet of my own kitchen, the memories didn't comfort me. They hurt. Because love that's been replaced doesn't just vanish, it lingers. It presses down where you thought you were still needed. And in that silence, I finally started to understand. They hadn't just forgotten to count me. They had already stopped long before the door ever opened. I stayed in that chair until morning light started to slip in through the kitchen blinds, soft and silver, touching the rim of the untouched pie like it still had hope. But I didn't. Not anymore. There's a silence that feels peaceful, and there's a silence that feels final. What wrapped around me that night wasn't quiet for healing. It was the kind that settles after something has already ended. I got up slow, bones stiff from hours of stillness, and moved through the house like someone visiting a museum of their own life. Every picture on the wall, every framed handprint or crooked school award, they all looked different now, like echoes of a time when I knew who I was in his life. I went to the hall closet, opened the drawer at the bottom, and pulled out the manila folder I hadn't touched in years. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside were the documents I'd kept safe. Not just legal papers, but the plans I'd made when he was younger, when I thought I was building something secure for his future, something solid he could lean on long after I was gone. I'd spent years managing that trust. Every dollar earned carefully, tucked away, protected. I never asked for thanks. I only asked for respect. The kind you show not in words, but in how you treat the hands that lifted you. I set the folder down on the table, beside the pie. The two of them looked like they didn't belong together, but somehow they were now tied to the same wound. I lit a candle in the corner, not for mood, not for comfort, but because I needed something warm in the room while I did what came next. I picked up the phone. My lawyer's number hadn't changed. I didn't dial the full thing, just pressed the button I saved years ago. When he answered, all I said was, "It's time." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. That's the thing about silence. When it drags long enough, the people who know you best can hear what you're not saying. I told him to pull the trust, stop the access, freeze the benefits. Everything that flowed from my name into their hands, let it pause, let it wait. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. Respect is a door. Once it's shut too many times, you stop knocking. Then I sat down to write the letter. Not typed, not formal, just me, a pen, and the truth I hadn't spoken aloud. The words didn't rush. They came like slow rain, steady and certain. I told them what needed to be said. Not to wound, but to remind. I wrote about the table I built. Not the furniture, but the foundation. The values, the effort, the sacrifices I made so they could rise. I didn't list everything. That kind of love doesn't fit neatly on paper. I just left one clear sentence at the end, ink pressed into the page like a quiet stamp of goodbye. Next time you count seats, remember who built the table. I folded it once, placed it with the lawyer's notice, and slid both into an envelope without trembling. Not because I wasn't sad, not because I didn't ache, but because grief, when held too long, turns into clarity. And I'd finally seen enough. I had never been the kind of person who counted what I gave. I didn't keep a list, didn't tally up the favors or the sacrifices. That's not how I was raised. When you love someone, truly love them, you give without keeping score. But that morning, as the candle burned low and the last of the wax curled along the dish, I realized that trust, like anything else, has its limit. And mine had quietly run out. I had helped them buy that house. When the bank hesitated, I stepped in. I didn't tell anyone else, not my sisters, not my friends. I just did it, quietly, because it mattered to me that they had a home to grow into. I called it a gift at the time, but the truth is, it was more than that. It was a stake in something I believed we were building together, a future where I'd always have a place, even if just on the sidelines. The trust fund came later, when things got tight after the first baby. I told them it was for emergencies, for peace of mind, for the moments life doesn't warn you about. I arranged it all myself, the accounts, the protections, the steady drip of support. They never asked where the money came from, and I never said. It wasn't important to me that they knew every detail. It was important that they never felt alone. I wanted them to feel secure, the way I tried to make my son feel every night under my roof growing up. But security, I learned, is only appreciated when it's understood. And when I stood on that porch, pie in hand, turned away like a misdelivered package, something in me understood. This was no accident. You don't forget to count someone who built the steps you're standing on. You just stop seeing them altogether. So I called my lawyer again, told him to shut the valve. Those were my words. Not cruel, not angry, just clear. Shut the valve, stop the transfers, freeze the support. If they needed help now, they'd have to find another well to drink from. Love doesn't mean funding your own erasure. Once everything was set, I folded the official notice with care, slipped it into a plain envelope. Then I reached for the letter I'd written by hand the night before, smoothed it flat, and placed it on top. The paper still held the weight of every word I'd pressed into it. My handwriting was neat, but there was no softness in the lines. I sealed the envelope with both letters inside, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because silence had already done its damage. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. It was the moment I stopped begging to be counted and reminded them who built the table they were now feasting at without me. I didn't leave it in the outgoing mail bin. I drove it myself, slid it right into their mailbox before the afternoon sun touched their porch. I didn't ring the bell, I didn't look through the window. I turned, walked back to my car, and went home. Some things don't need to be spoken twice. Some messages are loud enough without a single word raised. I remember the weight of that envelope in my hands. It wasn't heavy in the way paper usually is. It carried something else. Something deeper. I held it like you'd hold a final word you know you'll never get to say out loud. The kind that deserves to land without interruption, without argument, without the noise of denial standing in the way. I didn't dress up that day. I didn't put on lipstick or earrings or even bother with a coat. Just threw a scarf around my neck and slipped on the same flats I wear when I water the plants. I wasn't going there to be seen. I was going there to be understood. The drive was quiet, not the heavy kind, but the clean kind, the kind that follows a long storm. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need company. I had already said everything that mattered inside that envelope. As I turned onto their street, I slowed down, not out of hesitation, but out of care. I wasn't there to confront. I wasn't there to plead. This wasn't about starting a fire. It was about marking a line. Their mailbox was just like I remembered. Black, a little tilted from years of weather, the flag still stiff from disuse. I parked across the street, checked to make sure no one was watching, though even if they were, I wouldn't have changed a thing. I walked up slow, steady. The wind lifted the edge of my scarf, but I didn't bother to fix it. I opened the box, slid the envelope in without a sound, and closed it with care. No knock. No call. No waiting for anyone to come outside. I turned around and walked back toward my car as calmly as I had arrived. Inside that envelope were two things. One was the typed letter from my lawyer, simple and direct, explaining the trust fund had been frozen, all access suspended until further notice. No loopholes, no polite language, just fact. Just truth. The other was mine. Written in my own hand, without bitterness, without theatrics. A few lines, steady and clean, and at the bottom, one sentence. Next time you count seats, remember who built the table. That was all I needed to say. I didn't name names, I didn't list deeds, I didn't remind them of every favor, every sacrifice, every quiet moment where I gave without asking for anything back. I didn't have to. That one line carried all of it, because they knew. Whether they'd admit it or not, they knew exactly what I meant. That house, that warmth, those holidays, those meals, they were built on hands that now stood outside, holding nothing but memory. I drove home the long way, not because I was lost, but because I wanted to feel the road. To let the wind come in through the window and brush against my cheek like it used to when I'd drive with him beside me. Windows down, his voice humming along to the music. I let the silence fill the car, not with sadness this time, but with something steadier. Something that sounded a little like peace. They didn't count me. But I hadn't forgotten who I was. And that envelope, quiet as it seemed, had finally spoken for me. 2 days passed before the phone rang. I was folding laundry in the quiet, the television low in the background, not watching anything in particular, just letting the sound fill the corners of the room. When it rang, I didn't flinch. I recognized the number before the first full ring finished. It was the house line I helped them get connected when they first moved in. I let it ring until it stopped. No voicemail, just the kind of silence that waits to see if you'll come chasing it. I didn't. Later that evening, there was a text, short, hollow. It said, "We didn't mean it like that. No greeting, no apology, just a vague excuse shaped like concern." I sat with it for a moment, staring at the screen, reading it once, then again. And then I did something I'd never done with either of them before. I left it there, unanswered, not out of spite, not out of pride, but because some words don't deserve a reply. Some silences say more than explanations ever could. I wasn't being cruel, I was being clear. Clear about where the line was drawn now. Clear about how far I'd been pushed and how softly I had endured it until it no longer made sense to stay quiet. My love for them hadn't vanished, but the shape of it had changed. It had grown boundaries. It had grown a spine. That's what happens when someone stands on everything you built and forgets to reach back. There was a time I would have written back immediately. Offered them the benefit of the doubt, smoothed things over with grace I'd pulled from my own tired spirit. I would have said, "It's all right. I know you're busy. I know things get confusing. Maybe I misunderstood." But I didn't misunderstand. I heard her words. I saw her face. And in her stillness, in her blink, in the way she didn't reach for the pie, I saw the truth I had been too generous to name for far too long. That day, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't pace the floor, wondering if I was being too harsh. I simply turned it face down on the table and went back to folding my laundry. Back to matching socks and stacking towels. Back to a life that may be quieter now, but no longer bent around people who forget the shape of my care. Some calls don't need to be answered. Some texts don't need responses. Not because the person sending them doesn't matter, but because the version of you they expect to reply, the one who always makes room, who always forgives without pause, doesn't live there anymore. And maybe now, just maybe, they'll feel what it's like to knock and hear nothing on the other side. Not out of revenge, but out of reflection. Out of finally understanding what it means to be left standing alone on a doorstep, with full hands and an empty welcome. Thanksgiving morning came quietly. The sun rose slow that day, casting a soft golden light across the kitchen floor, the same way it used to when I was still making breakfast for a house that buzzed with voices and chairs scraping against tile. But there was no noise now, just stillness. No pot simmering on the stove, no footsteps rushing down the hall. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill that silence. I let it be what it was, honest. I washed my hands, lit 2 candles, one for presents, one for memory, and set a single place at the table. Just a plate, a fork, a linen napkin folded neat. I didn't pull out the serving platters or the gravy boat. I didn't reach for the extra chairs or think about who might be running late. This year, I wasn't waiting for anyone. This year, I set the table for someone who had never once left me behind. Myself. I opened the pie, the one I had carried all that way, the one that never found its way to their table. The crust still held its shape, and the apples had settled into sweetness. I cut a single slice and placed it gently on the plate, the way I would for a guest I wanted to make feel seen. I sat down and took a bite. Not rushed, not emotional, just present. I let the flavor fill my mouth, let the warmth sit on my tongue, and for a moment, it was just me, the flicker of candlelight, and a quiet peace that didn't need approval to exist. When I was done, I wrapped the rest of the pie in foil, careful not to let it spill or shift. I slipped on my coat, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door with the pie in my hands. Not for them. Not anymore. But for someone who needed it. Someone I may never meet. I drove a few blocks and stopped in front of the shelter I'd passed so many times but never stepped into. I walked inside, handed it to the woman behind the counter, and simply said, "Made this with love. It deserves to be eaten." She looked surprised, asked if I wanted to leave a note. I told her no. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about being thanked. It was about releasing something I had carried too long. about letting go in the most generous way I knew how. I walked back to the car without looking back. That night, the candles burned low beside the empty plate. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel erased. I had counted myself. And it turns out, that was the place setting I had forgotten to make all along. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't tell me to go. They just left my name off the list, left my chair empty, and let the silence do what words never had the courage to say. But I remember. I remember who stirred the soup while others laughed. I remember who folded the napkins, stitched the hems, brought out the extra chairs year after year. I remember who stood when everyone else sat, making sure no one left hungry. If they've forgotten, that's their story to live with. I didn't leave to be noticed. I left because there's a difference between being included and being tolerated. And I've lived too long, loved too deeply, to mistake one for the other. If you've ever shown up for someone who didn't count you, tell me below. Or just write, I built the table. That's enough. Please subscribe if you've ever been quietly forgotten and chose to remember your worth anyway. And if you're watching this alone tonight, this voice is for you. Thank you for watching.